Coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to Africa Focus, where we bring you news from across the continent right here on Switch TV Kenya. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Talk to us via social media platforms as Switch TV Kenya, Joel Church M on Twitter, as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Church. Send in an SMS via 111 444 111. But first, here stories making headlines. Vaccination against the deadly Ebola virus begins in Guinea since the deadly virus re-emerged in the country. Amnesty International new report reveals that Eritrean soldiers fighting across the border in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region killed hundreds of people in a massacre last year. Thousands of anti-government protesters take to the streets of Algiers as the Iraq pro-democracy movement gathers renewed momentum. Amnesty International in a new report has revealed that Eritrean soldiers fighting across the border in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region killed hundreds of people in a massacre last year in what could amount to a crime against humanity. The rights watchdog spoke to survivors of the atrocities and used satellite images to piece together the blood events of last November in the ancient town of Axum.
A lot of evidence that the Eritrean forces are involved in the fighting in Tigray. Not only what happened in Axum, but in other places, including the refugee camps in Tigray region. So there is a very conclusive evidence that Eritrean forces were involved in the fighting. And what we found out is that there has been indiscriminate shelling, systematic killing of civilians in Axum on 28th and 29th of November, and also looting of properties. And these crimes may amount to war crime and crime against humanity. The mass killing in the town was conducted mainly, or we can say overwhelmingly, by the Eritrean soldiers who were in control of the town by then. But about the war crimes, especially the indiscriminate shooting and artillery bombardment in the town, it was conducted jointly by the Eritrean and the Ethiopian defense forces. We could not establish the exact number of people who died in this massacre because we have received names of more than 200 people. But that's not exhaustive. According to the witnesses, there are so many people who were buried without being identified. What happened in Axum is atrocious, and the amount, the systemic nature of the killing, the way they executed people is extremely horrible. And not only that, they didn't allow the people to pick the dead and bury them for more than 48 hours after they were.
With our focus still on that particular story, Mekele, which is Tigray's region capital, and also a former TPLF power base, has been transformed by the gruesome conflict still grinding on in northern Ethiopia. Some have been injured by shelling and are recovering in hospital. Others have been displaced.
The city was a fast-growing city. It was a very vibrant city, which was alive 24 hours, and so people used to come and for recreation, for trade, and so on. So it was a very beautiful and lively city. But now, as you can see, it is covered in a blanket of sadness.
I am very sad. I'm supposed to be living my normal life at this moment. I am not armed soldier or a militia fighter. I have also seen other injured civilians like me, and many others are dying. It's very hard for me to bear this.
The area around Humera in western Tigray fell under the control of the Amhara Special Forces, which makes me furious, and I have stopped thinking about being Ethiopian. From now on, I don't believe that I am an Ethiopian.
The
people of Tigray has mixed feelings with regard to our interim administration.
The first one is they want to have a government that take over all the governance, activities of the region. On the other hand, as we are not elected, they have also some doubts. That's not.
Elsewhere, thousands of anti-government protesters took to the streets of Algiers as the Iraq pro-democracy movement gathers renewed momentum after a year-long hiatus due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Despite abandoned gatherings over COVID-19, crowds rallied in several neighborhoods of the capital Algiers in the early afternoon after Friday prayers and marched toward the city center. The Iraq protest was packed in February 2019 over President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's bid for a fifth term, and the long-time leader was forced from power in April that year. Demonstrators kept up weekly protests after Bouteflika's resignation, demanding a sweeping overhaul of a ruling system in place since Algeria's independence from France in 1962. The only suspended protest last March due to coronavirus restrictions, but calls have recently circulated on social media for a return to the streets.
We are here to demand independence and the establishment of a civil state, a state far from military rule.
Protesters were met by security forces who used truncheons and fired tear gas when a crowd forced its way through a police barrier to reach the Grand Post Office, the main Algiers rallying point of the Iraq protests. From the morning, police vans had taken up positions near main squares, the city centre, and roadblocks were set up on several major roads leading into the capital. As if no time had passed since the Friday demonstration in 2020, the crowds were full of the same flags and slogans.
We are here for freedom. Nothing has changed in Algeria. It has remained the same. There is nothing in this country. We are thinking about whether things should return to normal or whether we should immigrate. We still have a glimmer of hope, and we are still part of this popular movement.
On Thursday, rallying cries online also included calls for everyone to wear masks at the protest after many had not at a Monday demonstration to mark the second anniversary of the Iraq protest that has also drew thousands.
Away from that, nearly 670,000 people have been displaced by an extremist insurgency that has raged for 3 years in northern Mozambique. Some have moved in with host families, as some are living in temporary shelters, while others have resettled in newly created safe villages which they say are inhabitable.
Violence has forced thousands of Mozambique residents to flee their homes, but now hunger has driven some of them to risk their life by sneaking back to their old residence to gather food or even resume farming. The authorization to parcel the plots of land was given by the leader, and the leader didn't talk to the local landowners to tell them that from now on they will have to share the land with us, the displaced people. That's why we are having conflict between the locals and us. Nearly 670,000 people have been displaced by extremist insurgency that has raged in 3 years in the northern Mozambique. Some have moved in with their host families, some are living in temporary shelters, while others have resettled in the new created safe villages, but a critical lack of food has led them to be brave and returning back to their old homes. We don't feel like being here. They can put covers on homes, they can bring transport, bring trains and planes. They can bring everything, but what we want is to be able to have our own home, the land where we're born. The World Food Programme WFP distributed vouchers in December and January, while the locals used to buy foods from shops. But Christina Graziani, head of WFP, said that the program was so difficult to sustain because the stores are facing some difficulties to restock commodities in Palma. We have talked to the community leaders and they have told us that they negotiated already spoke and sorted it out with the government, and the government was doing everything to parcel the plots. Most of the time in this specific case that I was directly involved in, the locals come here to me to say that the jobs are already done. Even before insurgency struck, Cabo Delgado was already one of the poorest provinces in Mozambique, itself ranked among the world's poorest in the country. The UN announced this week that 1.3 million people in Cabo Delgado and neighboring Niassa and Nampula provinces are in need of humanitarian aid, with 950 people facing severe hunger. While the war is not over, there is no condition to go back. We are not forcing anybody to stay. No one is forced. We're just providing decent conditions to live independently.
Em função daquilo que vemos como urgente e aquilo que pensamos que podem ser condições condignas para alguém poder viver e viver de forma independente, não depender de donativos.
The scramble for food is evident in the Pemba neighborhood of Pakwet, where many displaced people have moved in with the locals. The locals complain that they are being excluded from humanitarian food aid despite having taken in extra mouths to feed. Robert Oman, Switch TV News.
Meanwhile, a special medical center in Zerekore in southeast Guinea is treating patients with Ebola, which is a deadly disease that has since re-emerged in the West African country, evoking the specter of the devastating 2013 to 2016 Ebola epidemic in West Africa that killed 11,300 people in Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone. Brand Mwenda with more.
Vaccination against the deadly Ebola virus began in Guinea on Wednesday, since the deadly virus re-emerged in the country. However, the country has reacted rapidly to its latest outbreak. With support from the World Health Organization, medical workers on Tuesday began administering vaccine in Goke.
It is a center where all patients with Ebola virus are isolated. It is a special center because the infection prevention and control measures are at a fairly high level. Then, the management takes into account a specific system that protects them both, the health personnel, the patients themselves.
La prise en charge qui tient compte d'un circuit spécifique qui protège.
Vaccinations began the following day at a military air base in Conakry, where 10 contact cases and 4 volunteers received jabs.
Un centre de traitement Ebola n'est pas un mouroir.
An Ebola facility is not a death trap. It is the first information, in the sense that we now have some perspective on the pathology, on this disease. We have treatments, the vaccines are available, patients' chances of survival are very high now.
Les chances de survie des patients est très élevée maintenant aujourd'hui.
Guinea recorded new Ebola cases on February 13th near the town of Goke, in the southeastern Zerekore region, and declared an epidemic shortly after.
The mortality rate before was up to 70%, but with the availability of these drugs, we were able to reduce that mortality to less than 10%.
Ebola causes severe fever and, in the worst cases, unstoppable bleeding. It is transmitted through close contact with bodily fluids, and people who live with or care for patients are most at risk, hence the need for vaccination.
The disease you have today, I had it before, but I confronted it. I confronted the disease while being really strong. So I explained a little bit how I lived, and when I was told the results, how I was. You can't give up.
At least 5 people have died in the latest outbreak so far, with the country's health agency reporting 10 confirmed or probable Ebola cases and are tracking 400 more contact cases.
Away from that, the grape harvest is in full force at the South African Hemel and Ad, that is vineyards, heaven and earth in Afrikaans, is a valley that has the ideal mix of sun and cool air thanks to the neighboring Atlantic Ocean. With low volumes and a solid reputation abroad, winemakers here have suffered less than the rest of the industry after alcohol sales bans were imposed during a tight virus lockdown. Take a look.
Heaven and earth. That is the name in Afrikaans for this valley nestled between arid mountains and the cool ocean, a location that makes it a paradise for wine growing. Not for nothing are vineyards in Hemel and Adi carving out a global reputation among wine lovers seeking a fresh, distinct flavor. Winemakers here do not try to imitate the big European names, which can often be a stifling benchmark.
Now, if your business relied a lot on tourism or direct sales from the property, you were hit particularly hard, particularly if you also ran a restaurant on the property. We're lucky on Hamilton Russell Vineyards in only selling, in my 30 years, on average about 7% of our wine directly. We almost refer people to retailers in the country of origin and say, rather buy it there.
We can have quite a lot of vigor in South Africa because of our sunshine and some of the soils. I think where we are, it's really nicely in balance, and we get beautiful, natural, low-yielding crops from our vineyards, and very nice small berries, good concentration, and we don't need to do much to try and extract from the Pinot Noir. It sort of comes quite naturally.
They produce wines with a strong South African identity, wines whose savor tells the story of their distant birthplace and bring with them the heritage from the first Huguenot plantations in the 1600s. Russell bought 52 hectares of land from his family in the early 1990s. The estate produces a red and a white wine from Bugandari grape varieties of eastern central France.
So we're really trying to make good wine, and I think that the best way to make good wine is to take your hands off it completely, and then one could say that we're making natural wine. But even so, I wouldn't go with the category because I've lost faith in the category. We rather just so we don't use it in our communication. But if you really look at what we're doing, we're basically making natural wine. All the vineyards are either organic or pretty close to organic. I think it's working on a deeper level than just the fact that the wine's grown here in our climate. I think that we can talk about our own grapes, our own DNA, Obviously, these grapes came from Europe, just like me. I also came from Europe long ago. But I've been here a long time. And I think most people would say that I've naturalized, much like the grapes.
At the end of his vineyards are a few fynbos, or local shrubs, a cliff, then the Atlantic, close to its dramatic confluence with the Indian Ocean. Namkana Samuel, Switch TV.
And on that note, now we're taking a short commercial break. Still to come. Locust menace turns into a source of livelihood for villagers in many parts of Kenya. Welcome back to Africa Focus. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Moving on, locust menace has turned into a source of livelihood for villagers in many parts of the country, including Turkana, Isiolo, Samburu and Laikipia. The invasion known to devastate crops is now being cultivated and turned into chicken feed. Our reporter Harry Chimea brings us more.
Pests have devastated crops and pastures in many parts of the country, eating everything that comes in their way. Now the situation is slowly turning. Communities harvest the locusts at dawn as they lay motionless, and in exchange they get 50 shillings per kilogram when they hand them to an agricultural farm called the Bag Picture.
And then we take those locusts away to our processing center where we leave them for 3 days. The importance of leaving them for 3 days is that most chemical pesticides will kill locusts within 3 to 4 days. So by leaving them that period, we can reduce the risk of having pesticide on the locusts that we harvested. And when we're happy with that, we put them through a grinder to kill them, and then we lay them on tarpaulins in the sun for about 3 days, obviously, depending on the weather. And once they're dried, we take them to the local mill to be milled into locust meal, ready to be sold to animal feed millers.
As of earlier today, communities collected 2.5 tons of the locust, and Ms. Stanford says the advantages include reducing infestation as well as processing healthy animal feed.
The massive advantage is that we're taking a pest and converting it into a protein source for animal feed. So if we look at the animal feed industry in East Africa, it is a blooming industry. It is growing every single year, but our inputs are not there. We're importing soy from our neighbors. We're importing soy from China. And our omena is coming from our lakes and our ocean, which is all wild caught, and it's destroying our ecosystems out there. So to take a pest like locusts and try and convert it into something that can replace those environmentally damaging sources of protein means that we are actually doing so much for our planet. but also contributing to the animal feed industry.
It is estimated that over 25 million people in East Africa will have faced acute food insecurity, and here's an opportunity to be part of the rapid response team. Reporting for Switch TV, my name is Harriet Chimea.
Let's now focus on this particular interesting story here in Kenya, where dangling shoes on electric power cables in most informal settlements in Nairobi City have become a common picture, with many assuming and bothering to know the essence. In Nairobi's Kibra slum, boots are hanged on electric cables to signify surrender by reformed youth from criminal activities and resorting to other productive activities. As it is the norm to take oath by lifting the Bible, they have hung their boots on electric power cables and change for the better. Robert Ouma with more.
In this shanty estate 6.6 kilometers southwest of Nairobi CBD, we find Kibra, Soweto slums, an estate marred by crime and lawlessness. You may think the owners of these shoes do not exist, or either these shoes are stolen. No. On these electricity cable lines, hanging boots are never new scenery. The boots remind residents here of hardcore criminals who had either died in the line of crime or those who have left crime and resulted to alternative sources of livelihood.
Hatukuwa na tunaweza bado letana pamoja kabisa because tulikuwa tunaogopa bado makarao. Lakini kenye ilikuwa nafanya hili kukosa.
Each shoe that dangles on this electricity cable carries with it tales of bloodthirsty life, now forgotten. We meet John Omondi and friends, reformed gangsters who now work in this car wash for a living. Each of them had a sole reason as to why they hung their boots literally on crime.
Watu walipokuwa wametoka kucheza rege asubuhi. So hapo hivyo wase wakanyang'anyana. Kesho yake watu waligeuzwa, walikuwa butchered vibaya sana, walikatwa vibaya.
Marafiki zangu walikuwa na dunga wababa wengine na visu, hiyo kama wametoka church huko juu. Sasa kwanza hiyo siku nilikuwa naona venye wanalia, hiyo iliniuma hiyo siku.
Crime being common for many years in such informal settlements, Omondi has used this car wash for years as a source of income and inspiration by employing more people who have reformed.
So ile tukaanza kuja wawili mmoja hivyo kujileta hapa hivi. Tukileta mtu mmoja tunahakikisha umehang boot yako, at least tujue hautarudi kwa crime again.
Through hapa nilipata kazi, nafanya kazi mahali pengine. So huku unapata napitia tu saa zingine zenye hakuna kazi, huko ndo nakuja hapa.
With the increase in the rate of unemployment in the country, here in Soweto, these boots are a constant reminders for the reformed gangs not to resort back to the unlawful tendencies.
Crime si kitu fiti. Manze huku nje pia life itakutandika. But kama ukipata wase kama ma big brothers, manze bu ngangana utafute kitu fiti yenye za kusaidia kwa maisha.
A win is a win, either big or small. And to the youth of Soweto in Kibra, hanging boots on an electricity cable line is a sign of victory. Robert Ouma, Flying Boots of Kibra in Nairobi.
In a country which the UN classifies as one of the most difficult for women, and her courageous career choice is breaking stereotypes. Take a look.
In Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, 19-year-old Asha Mohammed had to find a way to support her 2 children when she divorced her husband a year ago. So she turned her passion for video game racing into a job. She became a taxi driver.
When I was little, I was passionate about cars. I wanted to become a pilot one day. I didn't think of becoming a taxi driver in the beginning. But when the taxi company Rikab was started last year, I decided to join them, especially because there weren't any women drivers at the time. I saw an opportunity.
Women face an uphill battle for equal rights in conservative Somalia. The most recent data in 2012 showed the country among the 4 lowest on a United Nations Gender Equality Index. Divorce is frowned upon. Married at 16, Asha took already a courageous step in leaving her husband. Driving a taxi breaks another stereotype in a male-dominated sector, but her employer, the Rikab Taxi Company, was willing to break the mold when it launched last year.
The number of women taxi drivers was very low because of safety concerns. But since we launched the company, we are recruiting more women.
Taxi driving is a risky job. Attackers regularly set off car bombs at intersections and security checkpoints. 2,000 recab taxis ply Mogadishu streets. 3 drivers are women. Clients are getting used to having a woman driver. After initial unease, university student Sadiq Dakir says his feelings have changed.
These past months, I often use this taxi company, and even if usually it's a man's job, today I prefer women drivers. They are always on time and drive much more carefully.
Mohammed lives with her mother, who looks after her grandchildren while she works. Her job brings in $40 a day, enough to care for her family. Little by little, she makes a way for the future for herself, but also for other Somali women. David Kagina, Switch TV.
Well, that's all here on Africa Focus today, but keep the conversation going on our social media platforms at Switch TV Kenya, Joel Chacha M on Twitter, as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Chacha. My director has been Shen, and my name is Joel Chacha, and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Until next time, do have a safe, a great weekend.